I'm recording.
Nice.
So tell me what your name, your first and last name.
Uh, my full name is Santo Francesco Shim-eh-ka. There's an interesting story behind that. Um, Both of my parents are originally from Italy. On my dad's side, my grandfather's name was also Santo Scimeca. He, in the process of trying to come to this country, he ended up dying during the medical testing to get approved before immigrating to the U.S. So my dad was probably about 5 or 6 at the time, and he ended up losing his father at a young age prior to coming over to the U.S. With the rest of his family. Um, he has an older brother that he's still very close with, who I grew up around, Nick, and they attempted, when they wanted to have kids and tried to have kids, their firstborn they named after my grandfather, Santo. Um, that child ended up dying shortly after birth. So my father, when, he had a child, I was named after my grandfather, and I apparently was the one that stuck. So
It lived.
yeah.
Wow.
So that's where my name comes from. It means saint in Italian.
All right. So when did your mother and father come to the United States?
They came here in the 50s. So if I remember all the details correctly, my dad was 5 or 6 when he came here. My mother was about 13 when she came here. They didn't have much in Italy, so they had even less when they came to the country. And yeah, it was in the 50s, give or take.
All right. And then, was your family well off when they lived here? When you were growing up, what were they like?
They grew up in different parts of Italy. My dad was from Sicily. My mom was from Calabria. Both southern portion of Italy, rural farmland, very poor. They both come from large families. They each had like 8 or 9 siblings. They grew up as farmers.
Oh, thank you.
So when they came here, they came from poor, and they also came to the U.S. as poor people, and very hard workers. Both sides of my family, very hard working. My dad ended up with my uncle and whoever else came. They ended up finding jobs at Ford Motor Company and worked basically their entire lives for Ford Motor Company in New Jersey. And my mom's side, her and 2 of her siblings came to the U.S. She was the only one that came to the New York, New Jersey area. Her brother ended up moving to Chicago, starting a family over there. And one of her sisters moved to Canada. And they've been split up, but the rest of her family stayed in Calabria where they were born.
When you grew up, was your dad around? Was he working all the time?
So it was kind of interesting. I had a very big family presence on my dad's side because they all came to this country together, aside from my grandfather. So I had lots of aunts and uncles and cousins that all lived nearby, and we'd see each other all the time. Neither one of my parents are educated. My dad finished high school. My mom finished elementary school. And my dad worked at the Ford plant, and the only job I guess he got at the time was working night shift. So he would go in at midnight for work and then come back at 8 in the morning, Monday through Friday. So growing up, I didn't really see too much of my dad. When we were getting ready to go to school, he was coming back from work. When they got back from school, he was sleeping, and just as about we were getting ready to go to bed, he would be waking up to go into work. And that's a pretty hard life to try and maintain, and then go to like a normal, daytime on the weekends, and then switch back just before the week. So, he was there, he was present whenever he could be, but I didn't see him much growing up.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you do now? What's your profession?
Well,
Or what did you get your degree in? Or what did you get your school?
so I got my
No, thanks for icy ketchup. Yeah, two cheap.
good, thank you. So it was really weird growing up. Like I said, we weren't very well off or anything, and we had old cars as family cars, and they broke down a lot. So a lot of my dad's free time was spent fixing this 1968 Impala. Yeah, we got napkins. Thank you. So out of necessity, my dad was somewhat mechanically inclined, and whenever he was out there working on the car, I was out there working on the car with him. And eventually that got me to be mechanically inclined, and I loved go-karts. And at the age of I don't know, 10 or 12, I built my own go-kart through saving up cutting people's lawns. So I would cut lawns for $10 a cut. I'd put that money to go-kart parts, and I built a go-kart, in my early teens. And I would drive and beat the crap out of that thing wherever and whenever I could. I loved that thing. In fact, I still have it to this date. But that led me down a mechanical engineering type degree. So when I turned 18, I was ready to get out of the house and eventually moved down to University of Central Florida and pursued an engineering degree. And eventually that led me to my current job, which I'm still employed at today. I work on industrial size gas turbines or jet engines for power plants.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And how did you get into engineering? When you went to the university, you have an interesting story about seeing some cousins down there.
Yeah.
And how'd you went into the university? What was your impression?
So I grew up in a small town, or I say it's small because it's a square mile, but it was heavily populated. Tens of thousands of people.
What city? What?
Hasbrouck Heights, New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And my main goal for college was to get out of the house and get out of my town. And I grew up with a cousin who used to live in New Jersey with me, and we always had a blast together, my cousin Michael. And so at some point during our teenage years, him and his family moved down to Florida. And so we kind of lost touch for a little bit. And I remember, I want to say it was probably my freshman year of college. I was doing the college thing at a community college by me, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And this was the first spring break that ever came up. And I'm like, let's do some spring break thing. I don't even know what to do. And my cousin down in Florida ended up calling me out of the blue. And it's like, hey, we haven't seen each other in a while. Do you want to come down to Florida for spring break? I said, heck yeah. And him and some of his friends were planning a trip down to Key West. And I'd been to Florida or Disney World as a child, but never seen anything outside of that. So I got in my car and my Jeep at the time, and I drove 16 hours or 17 hours straight to come down to his place. He gave me a tour of the school, and at the time UCF was a huge school. It's even bigger now, but they were big in the engineering department. They had a whole building devoted to engineering, and a giant machine shop down at the bottom. They had SAE Indy cars and like dune buggies down in the lobby, and it just blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. And the weather down in Florida was amazing compared to cold winter in New Jersey. So I just the whole ambiance of it all, like, I was just super eager and excited to check it out. And the next year I applied to UCF. I got in, we moved in together, and I finished out my college career down there. Ended up living there for 10 years.
Wow. That's awesome. Okay, let's dig into these burgers. Sure, I'm starving. I can't sit over these burgers much longer without eating. Where'd you get?
Cheeseburger.
crispy burger. I got the jalapeno cheese over. I'm gonna keep it recording in case we touch Ali.
Yeah. Tell me about the time when you went over to Italy for the first time. What was it like when you went over to Italy the first time to visit your mother's family or father?
My mother's family. So most of our family still resides there today, including my cousins and, aunts and uncles. And I was probably maybe 6 at the time. And, I was 6 years old. You don't know much about the world at all. You know where you grew up and the kids in your school. And we weren't well off growing up. But when we went to Italy, it was a bit of a shock for me and my brother. The kids up there were growing up very differently. They were already working, with their families, business, shop, farm, whatever you want to call it, grocery store. They were pretty adventurous. Like, I remember seeing them climbing up, building walls and jumping from trees and hopping over walls and jumping over cars and stuff. A lot of them didn't have shoes. They were always dirty. And, it just made me realize, growing up poor in the U.S. was very different than growing up poor in a second world nation. So a lot of the stuff that, maybe if I didn't even have, a regular Nintendo, the original Nintendo system as a child.
Yeah.
We all knew what it was, even if you didn't have it. And over there, they'd never even heard of it. And it was a lot of outdoor play. They had soccer balls, bikes, and little BB guns, I guess. They were kind of like rubberized airsoft pellets. And I remember us, we didn't have that stuff in the U.S., and we didn't have it over there, but we would borrow my cousins or theirs. And I remember shooting the rubber pellets at, stray cats and, whatever wildlife was out there at the time. That's what they did. There was, not much else to do. But I remember the scenery just being gorgeous and very different growing up in the city. The town that they grew up in, the tiny town, mountainside town, all cobblestone roads like you would envision Italy being. I remember just walking up to the edge of the road, and you could see the mountainside, overlooking the sporadic houses that were built and scattered in between the farms and stuff. And it's just a very different culture. It was a farming culture. It was pretty cool. It was wild. And I remember as a teenager, my dad had just bought a new truck, Ford Expedition, and we didn't have a CD player in the house. The truck was the only thing with a CD player in it that we owned. And I remember my friend group at the time had we just borrow each other's CDs and stuff and trade them around. And I would blast Boston, Led Zeppelin, all these classic rock CDs. I would just sit in his truck for hours at a time and just blast classic rock music.
Yeah.
And that was the only way, you could listen to the radio, but you couldn't pick what you could listen to, and you had to listen to commercials. So just exchanging CDs and I remember sitting in the truck till it got dark. And I would just blast classic rock music. And eventually I got so into it, I started taking up drums. And my parents got me a drum set. And I practiced drums all throughout high school. And yeah, I still have that love of music today. And I can see my daughter, getting into music just as much as I did.
All right, Santo, thank you for talking to me, man. It's great meeting you and getting your story.
Yeah, same.
Cool. We'll have a burger sometime soon, man. We got to meet up again, but we'll probably will. So
sounds great. Look forward to it.
thanks, man.